Welcome to Spoilers Intended, a podcast about series, novels, and film. For this episode, Percy Jackson goes to space, the Hunger Games we must retrace, Harry Potter houses shall be embraced, and Ender's Game is our enemy's base. That's right, we're talking Pierce Brown's Red Rising. Hey everybody, welcome to the show. I'm Stephen Ford, joined as always by Andrew Knuckles.
Oi.
And Joel Killingsworth.
Hello.
What was that?
At least it wasn't him trying to do mine again.
True.
I was just trying to stay on topic.
All right, fair enough. So, before we dive right into Red Rising, I know, that's really easy. We've got a little topic to discuss before then. So we are going to look at a little discussion here on a first entry in a series, because that's what Red Rising is, right?
Yep.
First in a trilogy, which then grew into something larger. Not a duology, because that is not how that works.
I think there's a game for it too, isn't there?
There is. That was my only familiarity with the name or the words Red Rising put together, other than, like communism scares or something, until Brent suggested this for us. But before we get into that, we're looking at the first entry in a series and, just kind of pitching one just to start off, because this, from our perspective, as we're going to get into, this is a pretty good start to a series.
Yeah.
And so we're going to jump off of that, and I'm going to throw this over to Joel.
All right. Well, I have brought a book, not science fiction, but fantasy.
Okay.
And so I am offering up Black Prism, which is the first installment in the Lightbringer series by Brent Weeks.
Okay.
I
don't know anything about any of this.
All of those were words that I have never heard before in succession.
Right. So with this one, you have the main character starting out, Gavin Guile, is basically the emperor of the known world.
Mm-hmm.
And he is given this position by right of being the singular most powerful magic user in this world. Everyone who is gifted with magic has the ability to use 1 or 2 or 3 or maybe even 5 different colors of magic as they're denoted.
Okay.
But he is the only one capable of using all of them at the same time.
So he's an airbender, or the Avatar.
Sort of.
Yeah.
Sort of. And
or Mistborn.
So over
we can keep going with this.
But he has a limit on his power, and it's not what he can do, but how long he can do it. And his term and associated to that, his life is coming to an end. And so he has this list of things that he feels like he needs to accomplish, and the rest of the government isn't necessarily cooperating with him. And so he goes on a kind of clandestine mission to attempt to accomplish these great acts before his time runs out, and maybe find a way to escape his fate.
Okay.
Interesting. Yeah. You start out with this book. You're like, well, he's the emperor. I was like, well, the story arc's over. We missed the whole story.
and he's not even the only main character, but that's like where it really centers at the beginning.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Okay. How large is the series?
It's a 5-book series.
5-book series?
Yeah. Okay.
Have you read all of them?
I have.
Do you like them all?
Very much.
Yeah. So it's not just like a one and done where the first book is really good and then after that it just kind of tapers.
This just like I was thinking I wanted to do a representation from a fantasy series, and this one was the only one that I could think of where the first installment really punches hard.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the other series that I really like, the first one was okay, it's enough, but then it really gets good later. But this one starts really good.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, Andrew?
Okay, so I'm going with my tried and true anime, because that's how this works.
Yeah.
So mine is called Psycho-Pass. It is
okay. Yeah.
You're kind of familiar with it, but the general story is it is in the far future where there are these things called crime coefficients that basically it reads kind of like your general mental stability and how you if you're angry, if you're sad, that kind of stuff. And
the more stressed you get, the more likely you are to cause a crime, basically.
Mm-hmm. Basically. And if you're familiar with Minority Report, there are detectives called enforcers, where they have this kind of thing where they don't actually they don't have like ballistic weapons like revolvers and guns and everything in this universe. They're all banned essentially, and they have these things called enforcers that use these guns called dominators, where the dominator will basically read the person's crime coefficient, and if it is past a certain level, it'll just kill them. And that's the general gist of it. Is relatively dystopian, just because everyone has their own specific kind of role, and it follows this young detective that is entering the force from university, essentially. And it just kind of it's like a cyberpunk crime detective show.
Yeah, the really, because I've seen Psycho-Pass.
Okay.
I think the most interesting part of it is watching how the characters respond to different moral dilemmas, because they don't actually have choice, right? The Big Brother-esque eye in the sky kind of supercomputer that controls their weapons is choosing for them. And so when they're faced with moral choices, they may disagree with what is decided for them. And so that provides a lot of interesting conflict.
Yeah. And the first season of the show is really, really good. And it goes, I think, all the way up to like episode 24-ish, I think, for the first season. And then the second season, unfortunately, it tries to retread a lot of what happens, and then it's not that good. But then they have a movie for it, which is essentially Question Mark season 3, which is really good. And then hypothetically, there was a season 4 that's going to happen at some point, but who knows? But the first season is really good, and you can pretty much, like, you don't have to go beyond that to get a complete story.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, yeah, that's pretty good. So I waffled on mine. I'm weak. I can't decide which one I want to go with. So I'm gonna also land down on anime.
Okay.
Because why not? We've determined I have no specialty. I'm just here to touch on everything.
He is the jack of all trades.
Yes. So I'm going with Aldnoah Zero.
Okay.
I don't know if you are familiar with it or not.
I'm not.
Okay.
I am.
Yes. So it is large robots, anime, kind of a classic, understandable setting, but it is, and Andrew's going to correct me on the main points when I get this all wrong, but there is essentially a plot, and
there is a plot.
Yes. Also a plot within the plot.
Ooh.
But you have the power struggle between Mars and Earth. And basically it ends with Mars coming up with a reason to attack Earth. A casus belli, if you will. I've totally butchered that word, but it's okay. And they send down their giant robots, and they are way technologically ahead of Earth, essentially. And a lot of the initial defenses just kind of get destroyed. So in classic...
Well, it's more of a sneak attack, but...
It is, well, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But in a classic anime large robot trope, it is up to the children to save the world.
Yep.
That's pretty much how it always goes.
The teenagers who are in training. And each episode kind of breaks down into where the big bad boss, which is a Martian knight, so a large, I really want to say Gundam pilot over and over again. I can't because it's not Gundam. But yeah, a large mecha pilot presents a series of problems. Essentially, each mecha is kind of a puzzle box for the students. So it kind of goes through each episode. How do they divert, face, avoid, and ultimately overcome these big bosses? So it's kind of almost every episode is almost like a Zelda boss, where it has a weakness, they have to find it, etc. And the whole story that's going on within this is pretty much complete by the time season 1 ends.
Yeah,
I don't think that the people who wrote it expected there to be a season 2, because they pretty definitively end season 1.
So, fun fact: Gen Orobuchi, he wrote season 1 of Aldnoah Zero. He also wrote season 1 of Psycho-Pass.
Oh, perfect! I nailed this.
He chose to leave at the end of season 1 for both shows.
Oh, and they both suffered.
Both season 2 follow-ups were very bad.
Yeah, I really just don't think that it was intended for there to be a second season of Aldnoah Zero, because the ending is pretty clear cut what happens, and then the second season picks up, and it's like, oh, by the way, here's this back, and it's like, that's not how this works.
Well, and what happens with season 2 of Aldnoah specifically is they actually revert a lot of the character development that happens through most of the show, because they just didn't really know where to go with it.
Well, and then the power creep just kind of goes out of control.
That's generally a problem with mecha series.
Well, specifically just for the main character, his power creep goes out of control, and it gets weird. And a big pivotal character who was around for all of season 1 isn't in season 2, and they try to like replace her with other people, and it just doesn't work. The story doesn't support it. The story ended at season 1.
But season 1 is honestly like really fantastic. It's a really good 12 episode, just encapsulated story that has some really good kind of like, I'll say Game of Game of Thrones level betrayals and just really solid action.
Because all of the Martian knights each are kind of leading their own separate invasion, and it's kind of a contest between them of who can do the best.
Yeah,
so they're all overreaching each other, and that's kind of leaving them with these vulnerable points that the children can exploit.
Yeah.
And these vulnerable moments, or where one betrays the other in an attempt to further their own gains, etc.
Yeah, having warring factions within a seemingly unassailable single faction is always a really fun dynamic to explore.
I mean, it's about the only way to make it reasonable for them to be beaten.
Yeah, because it's a very feudal style system, which is actually going to be perfect for Red Rising.
There's a reason why I waffled back, and I was like, wait, no, this is Mars, and okay,
no, this works great.
We'll go with this. But no, it's first season is great. If I remember correctly, it was on Netflix. I think it's still on Netflix.
I'm pretty sure it's still on Netflix.
I definitely watched it on Netflix.
Yeah.
So it's out there if people want to watch it. First season is great. Second season, I can't recommend.
Yeah, just once you get to, I think, episode 12, just stop watching, and you will just enjoy. You will stop watching the show knowing that it ended on a great cliffhanger kind of finishing style, then you never have to think about it again outside of anything. Oh, that was a great show. Yeah,
it may not ultimately be a completely satisfying ending, but it kind of fits with kind of the darker, like this, they are really fighting against a stronger power than them at the end of the day.
Well, and a lot of times with these kind of shows, it's really successful, and then the production company's like, we want more.
We want to make more money.
And the writer's like, we don't have more. And the production company's like, too bad. You have to make more.
Family Guy, is that you?
I mean, it's pretty much any like super popular syndicated show.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the classic American example at this point. Is it still going on?
Yeah.
Oh no. Anyways, moving on. We kind of covered that, wrapped that up pretty well. So we're going to get into the meat of the show, which is talking about Red Rising,
which is a book.
It is a book. Our first book. And I do want to give a shout out to Brent Wong, a listener who suggested for us to cover this. None of us had read it. I don't know if we'd necessarily really even heard of it.
No, I hadn't.
So my wife had read it back in maybe 2018, and she mentioned it to me. She was like, "Oh, you would probably really like this." And at the time I was just like, "I'm good. I'm kind of done with Audible for right now. I don't want to listen to any more books."
Then a friend who you don't live with suggested, "I'm all in."
Well, when it's required reading, then
that's fair.
I don't have a choice.
But I do.
Wow.
Brett made me be here.
I do want to give props though, because initial synopsis look, my eyes glazed over a little. I'm like, oh no, YA dystopianism stuff. Brent, what have you done to us? But all's well that ends well. It was better than that initial expectation, and maybe that might actually color our scores. Where it's like, I expect this to be terrible, but we'll find out. So, Joel, you want to go over our score?
Yeah.
And then I'll go into maybe a little breakdown
I think
bad synopsis first.
Yeah, bad synopsis
first.
All right, so bad synopsis. This is far future sci-fi.
Yes.
We're still in Earth's solar system. Humanity hasn't really branched out farther than that, but all of the planets and whatnot are in play, right? And so you have a very rigid caste system that are denoted by colors, and so your color is essentially your race that you're born into, your caste, and you have a very specific sort of role in society that you play, and there's no mobility, right? Very rigid. You can't get a better life for yourself or anything like that.
Yeah, even if you're in the lower side of a specific caste, you're there.
Yeah.
You don't really migrate within the caste.
Once a red, always a red.
So they're denoted by colors, red being the lowest. Red are the miners and the general servants of everybody else. And so the story is about an exceptional individual who is a red, who is recruited by a resistance movement to undergo rigorous body modifications to pass himself off as a member of the highest caste, which is the Golds, and participate in their elite training academy,
training/recruiting.
It's like a military academy, kind of,
to become a member of their highest, ostensibly merit-based
system
subcaste, right? Within their overall caste. And from there, potentially be able to enact change or be in a position to help a revolution take place. And so that's the goal for the character as we enter into the story.
Yeah. Well, that was not a bad synopsis. That was a good synopsis.
Okay.
Yeah,
Props.
it was a synopsis.
It was, in fact, a synopsis.
It occurred. So for general score, we gave this novel a 7.9 out of 10. So fairly high.
Yeah.
And
we can blame Joel for a little bit of the...
I pulled it down just a little
We'll
bit.
find if people make it through, we'll find out once we get into the spoiler zone.
And that score is taken off of 4 categories in our rubric for books, that being setting, character, plot, and the writing. The writing being just how the author was able to communicate the setting, character, and plot.
Correct. Yeah, kind of the overarching piece. Because obviously we can't adapt the rubric from films or series. There's no music.
There's no spectacle.
Unless you did the audible. And there is spectacle. It's just a different kind of spectacle.
Yeah.
It's the writing, really, is the spectacle.
There's no performance unless you listen to the audiobook.
There's a score if you listen to the audiobook.
At
the end of this one, at least,
I mean, there's one.
You can give a score on one song. Take it or break it, boys. All right. Well, I think that pretty well covered it.
Well, yeah. I mean, we also need to give our general.
Oh, yeah, you're right. You're right. Trying to jump ahead.
It is not the intermission.
I'm ready to be entertained.
He looks at me. He's like, "Hey, you're getting ready to do your intermission speech?" No, I'm not.
All right. Well, let's hear some props and some negatives then, Andrew.
Okay, sure.
Since you're ready to go on this.
Okay, so going into this book, I literally knew absolutely nothing about this book besides the title, which was Red Rising, and I knew it was a YA dystopian. That is about as far as I got. I didn't read a synopsis. I had no idea what it was about at all. And going into the book was kind of fun because I got to learn about the world like I had no idea what it was about.
Ice cold.
Yeah, completely cold. And it was actually really fun. The way that it was written, which is in first person present
tense, yeah.
Was very off-putting. I've never read a book in that tense before. And it took me probably about a third of the book to finally get used to it. But once you get used to it and he actually has people to talk to him and everything, then it makes a big difference, and it actually kind of brings you into a lot of the action that happens later on in the book.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed it. I thought the setting was pretty cool, if not a little bit generic, just because, far future caste system, all these, all the kind of stuff you see from like Hunger Games and whatnot. I mean, that's just part of it. But overall, I really enjoyed it. It was way better than what I was expecting it to be, because I was expecting like Hunger Games, and I got kind of like a Lord of the Flies.
That's Hunger Games.
No, Hunger Games is Battle Royale. There's a big difference between that and Lord of the Flies.
A little bit.
Because there's a structured battle system, where this is more of a feudal style. You just have to survive, but you can survive in any way that you need to choose. And turns out everyone likes to choose combat.
Yeah. So I would say for me, this struck kind of a combination between Hunger Games and Ender's Game.
Okay. Which I have not read.
It kind of felt like a mesh of those two concepts.
Yeah. Ooh, that's a really good. It's also really short.
I would say though, we're talking about it in terms of YA dystopian, because that's what the stories that are most like it are. But this really goes really hard into handling adult themes that come about through powerful individuals forcing their will on other powerful individuals through the use of violence. And so that if you're squeamish about that kind of thing, then tread with care. It is a little more adult than your typical YA dystopian.
It was quite graphic.
Yeah, it was. So, I'm echoing some of what's already been said. This is a really tightly written, fast pace from the book. Once it starts going, goes.
Yeah, like it hits the gas and it just does not stop.
There are no breaks.
Yeah.
It's very, very personal because of the first person present tense. And that works for the action sequences and kind of the playing off the unreliable narrator and, what do you actually know about these people? What does he actually know about himself, et cetera? It works really well for that. I think the biggest single concern outside of the fact that it is, first person present tense, which is already kind of an awkward writing style. Andrew already said it took him a while to adapt to it. There are a lot of people who just won't read books in that chosen style.
It was very weird.
Yeah. I totally agree with that. But for me, my biggest concern there is because it is that style, it's very reliant on you kind of emotionally identifying with the character and what's happening. So if that misses for you, this could be a rough read.
Yeah, it could be a pretty big slog if you're not invested in his motivations.
Well, and if it doesn't resonate with you, if it doesn't click, then there are no other perspectives. There's no other character perspectives. The whole book is kind of wasted on you in a sense. So there is a big risk in that for the author, Pierce Brown. And I think he pulled it off. For me, obviously, it resonated, it clicked. So I think he pulled it off. For others, it may not be the case. That's maybe my only cautionary tale, because he used a lot of stuff that we're familiar with. Hunger Game. I reference it in the title. I'm not going to say these words anymore. And we've seen it before. Percy Jackson. It's very Roman and Greek mythology.
Yeah,
they are not the literal gods from it, but they like to think they are. And of course, it plays into it, right? Because we're dealing with the solar system, and what are the planets all named after? Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I was quite frankly very surprised by how good it ended up being. And, maybe some of that, we'll let Joel get in here and go to town once we get past the spoiler wall, because maybe some of that was just because my expectations weren't high to start. I don't know. We'll find out.
And, as we head into the intermission, if you don't want to risk hearing the Forbidden Song, we understand. If you like what you've heard so far, we'd appreciate it if you supported the show at patreon.com/spoilersintendedpodcast. And if you're brave enough to join us in the dance, listen on.
Alrighty, we are beyond the intermission, past the spoiler wall. Everything ahead is weapons free. Enter if you dare.
Yep.
So right off,
much like the Valley.
Much like the Valley.
Yeah.
Yes. So right off the bat, we are going to talk about the setting, which is somewhat self-explanatory in itself. We didn't choose an opaque word to describe this, which is kind of nice. And it's basically where is the book set? How is it set? Where does everything take place?
What time period?
What time period? But also, how well does it sell that? Does it feel, because there are a lot of shows and movies especially, and books, because it's easier to mess it up in a film or a movie, right? Because you don't get as much time to talk about the setting.
Yeah.
And there's also a lot of books where they spend too much time talking about the setting, and that can be a detractor. So that is what we're looking at. I'm going to toss this to Andrew first.
Oh, sure. Okay. So I gave setting a 7. And really just because the general setting for just dystopian stuff always kind of feels the same. It's most of the time always far future, where there's really high technology, very big differences in classes of, you have the haves and definitely the have-nots. And there's always going to be some kind of, resistance movement that tries to take over and overthrow the people that are in power. That's pretty much every dystopian YA that you can just every single one, just check boxes. And this is pretty much no different. Now, kind of like what Joel said earlier was the fact that it is a YA dystopian, because that's kind of like the easiest way to compare it. But I think you said that this was actually marketed as a sci-fi.
It was marketed as sci-fi.
Right.
And because of that, knowing that, it makes a little bit more sense. I don't think it really changes what my score would be, but the settings, it was exactly what I expected it to be. Even though even going into it, I still didn't know anything about it. I was like, well, I could probably expect some kind of, I did not expect it to be on different planets. That is the one thing I was like, ooh, they're on Mars. And then we're talking about Ceres and other, really far planets and moons and everything. So that got me pretty excited and pretty interested in the general story as it went on.
Well, you're a big fan of The Expanse, which is another
sci-fi
that's limited to the known solar system, and this is similar scenario situation.
I can't remember if in The Expanse they actually treated Pluto as a planet.
I don't remember Pluto.
Don't think
Ever
they
being
do.
mentioned.
I don't think they ever mention it.
They may have mentioned it like
They
in
didn't
passing.
really mention Neptune.
You know
pretty
what?
much nothing past Saturn.
I'm
Yeah.
going to give setting more points just for that. Pluto came back as a planet. Props.
Pluto came
in your
back as a
face,
god.
Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Yeah. Well, on that note, I'm going to take over the setting because we're gonna give a little high note here. We're gonna bump up the score a little bit more. I gave it a 9
Ooh,
because
bumpity bumpity.
from my perspective, is it YA dystopia? Yes.
Yes.
Is it the best developed YA dystopia ever? Probably. Which, knowing from you, Joel,
I mean, ever is strong, but
so far,
it's pretty good.
so far.
Yeah.
There's nothing that I've
It is
seen
definitely up there.
or touched upon that is this well fleshed out top to bottom in terms of where they live, what's happening, how they got here in a sense, everyone's places within it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Which so it makes more sense now that it was marketed or published as Sci-Fi versus YA. Given that context, it makes more sense that there's just that much level of detail, which obviously I appreciated.
Well, and some of the technology that they have feels more like magic and more fantasy elements.
But like when you're dealing with far future, like you can't really get away from that because the only tie that you have to something that's like hard science fiction is that it's just like one or two advancements ahead of where you are. So you could envision being there.
Yeah.
Whereas this is so far ahead of where we are that we just can't.
And we got a little bit of your pet peeve, Joel. We didn't get a lot of.
Oh, we're going to talk about that in the writing section.
Oh, I know. But we got a little bit of it.
Yeah.
I didn't feel like it was egregious.
Yeah, where they have like blood oranges from this place being called, whatever.
Yeah.
Sandworms. Yeah.
Argorian jingleberries.
Yeah.
You know it's berry, but you don't have to know what the rest of that means. Yeah. I mean, there's a little bit of it, but it felt like it was slang offshoots of, so it felt naturally
like it was derivative.
Yeah, naturally developed.
Talking about slang, one of my favorite pieces of the world building was the swearing, right?
Yes. Yes.
Because they had
Finally.
not
Wheel of Time, take notes.
Not only was it swearing that kind of tells you where characters are from, it actually becomes important to the plot, which is also really wonderful where you can tie setting into the plot.
Well, and because whenever someone breaks that, whenever Darrow breaks that kind of thought process, whenever he's confronting Apollo at the end of the book, and he says that, and you're just like, oh no. Yeah,
and also it's really great too because outwardly Darrow is trying to pretend to be from this completely alien culture from his, right? Because there's no commonality between the culture of the Golds and the culture of the Reds, more or less.
They are people. That's about it.
Yeah,
the Golds don't even look at them as people.
Right?
So.
No, exactly.
But so outwardly he is always using the phrases and like through the whole like second act of the book, it's you're just hit over and over again with these are the things you have to do to pretend to be a Gold. Stop doing that. It's going to give you away as a Red. So they're very clearly highlighted for you as the reader during that section. And then you get to the later sections. And even while he is externally in the dialogue using the Gold lingo, internally in his own monologue, he's still using the Red lingo, which is really interesting. And I'm really curious to see in future books if that is a knob that the author chooses to use to start slowly shifting so that you could watch his internal identity begin to change in that way.
Because that is a large concern for Darrow throughout is losing who he is, right?
Yeah.
We'll get probably a little more into that in the plot.
Yeah, sorry, I drew us away.
Yeah, pull us away from the setting.
But yeah, like I gave setting an 8. Okay. So like I'm sitting in the middle.
Hit the spread.
I still like it overall. I felt like naming the cast's colors is a bit simplistic. I would like something a little bit more advanced. And basically they all were physically the same color as the color of their cast. And that's kind of
a little too Power Rangers.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so in place of colors, what would you want?
I would want made up words that sound like they're not made up. I will admit it's very difficult to pull off correctly.
Isn't that what you just would knock it for like Ithilien thornberries?
No, because that's
jingleberries. Get it right.
That's a very specific formula.
Yeah,
right. Like calling them rusters because they work metallic ore underground
on the red planet.
Like that is I really like that.
But see,
like all of the slang that the cast had for one another, I really love those words.
But even that is a more derogatory term, right? Because within the individual cast, you have low red, high red, where high red isn't doing hard physical labor. They're more household servants, these kinds of things.
And I'm not saying that I have the solution. I'm just saying I know what shape the solution is.
Right.
Yeah, that's fair.
But I will say I really appreciate the level of nuance throughout the setting. Even within the cast, you have a high and a low. You start to get into, the further Darrow gets into gold society, you start to hit where it's no longer unambiguously, oh, all golds are just horrible people. Some of them are just people here to have fun. They're just people.
And that's what really redeemed the cast system to me is that, okay, so on a surface level, we have a mile wide and an inch deep, but then once you start drilling into, I mean, a little bit of the reds, we don't really spend much time with them. It's mostly in the golds. And there's
are these people really bad?
It's really, well, are they really bad? But not only that, like there's several different layers. There's like 4 different layers within the golds that are that within each of those layers there are individual power struggles, right?
No,
so like, it's very, very deep once he actually goes into it, and I feel like that really redeems a lot of the whole feeling of the world,
right? And that's where my high score is coming from. Is there is a ton of nuance. There are a lot of it's like an onion, right? There's a lot of layers, and it also kind of makes you cry. But mostly, there's a lot of layers. And the more that our main character peels back as he experiences, and the more he sees, the more opportunity there is to question what he's doing, who he is, etc., as he tries to find his place within that setting.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of character,
yes,
you get to go.
I get to go. So I gave
Andrew's the captain now.
I gave character a 7.
Okay.
I felt that Darrow as a protagonist was pretty well handled.
Yeah.
You understand his motivations. There's very deep feelings, right up from from the first scene, he's gushing about Io, and so you know she's dead.
Yeah. But it was funny too, because whenever I saw him like kind of talking about his wife so much, I'm like, oh, that is just death flags all over the place.
Oh yeah.
And then she's just like, I want us to live for more. I'm like, nope, that's 2 strikes. You're dead.
Guaranteed next scene, she's out.
That's not how baseball works, Joel.
That's how baseball works in the society.
Ooh.
2 strikes, you're dead.
You're
not out. You're
dead. Kill you.
But anyway, so like his motivation all the way through made a ton of sense. And like what you're talking about with the internal conflict of I go through such traumatic events and bond with these people that I should hate. And who does that change who I am, inside? And that question continues to come up over and over again as he goes through this transformative experience, first physically and then of his self. But flip side of that, and I feel like this is partly due to the perspective that we get with that first person present tense, is that all of the supporting characters felt one-dimensional.
They're archetypes.
They did one thing.
Yeah.
And none of them really had much else to offer.
Mustang had a decent amount.
She is one of the few exceptions, but most of these characters,
like Pax is he's just the big brute that he's Amos from The Expanse or whatever,
the Mountain from Game of Thrones. He's a lot of different.
He's the big guy with the axe,
right? So I guess I've kind of jumped in, so I'll take up here. I gave character an 8 because I agree. I think Darrow's development over time is really interesting. And it's really neat to see both his concern for, because the longer the book goes, the longer time he is just not within his home society, who he is. And so there's a really strong concern there of losing who he is. His whole physical structure is changed. Even looking at a mirror, he's not looking at the same person. So there's a huge disconnect there for him. I also really liked how at the beginning of the book, the very beginning of the book, he's a true believer.
Yeah.
He believes that if they turn in the most helium, they'll get the laurel, not the gammas.
Yep.
That they are doing the best they can to make Mars habitable. He's all in on what the society is shilling to keep the Reds in line.
Yeah, he wasn't unhappy with his situation beyond as long as EO was there.
Right. He had his wife. He had a lot of pressure, a lot of stress, a lot of demands. But he was capable. He was meeting these demands, making things happen, being better at them than the people who were older than him, et cetera, et cetera. And he really didn't have a reason to question the society outside of the questions his wife was posing, right?
Yeah.
And of course his father, because as all good heroes, this one isn't truly an orphan, but he's pretty close. So, and the other limitations are there, right? First person, you just don't get a chance to get to know the other characters because we never change perspective. And a lot of them are one-note wonders. Andrew already referenced Pax.
Yeah.
Julian is also kind of a one-note wonder. He is literally just the posh British, goes
You
to...
mean Cassius?
You mean Cassius?
No, I'm talking about Julian. I'm talking about his brother.
Oh, okay.
Cassius is also that, although he has that false nobility.
Maybe Julian was in the book for so short of time, I didn't even look at him as a character and just a flag.
Well, Julian is important for the...
Well, he's important for
he served a very specific purpose in that you had to believe that Darrow liked him.
Right.
Early and quickly.
Well, but he also comes in as, again, like I said, the posh British, right?
Yeah.
So it's very much so, you'll never believe he's a supporter of York. Could you believe the team that just can't win? Who would support such a team? It's, I went to Cambridge. You didn't go to Oxford? Or whatever, right? Yeah. And it's
all meant in good fun.
Right, but it's the fluff of the society, not the hardness that lies underneath it. And that's what Julian's really riding on, whereas the other characters who make it further in the book are riding on the hardness of the society.
Yeah.
Andrew?
So so Joel had a 7, you had an 8, I have a 9.
Yeah,
and
we just did this around.
We've kind of gone over a lot of the points that I made, but because it is present tense, first person, you really only get Darrow as obviously your vehicle into the story, and I really kind of leveled with him pretty early, just with I've obviously never lost a wife or anything like that, but it's you can definitely feel the development already start taking place after she gets killed,
and the author does a good job here of not cheapening that, right? Because like he essentially commits suicide after that.
She does,
and then he's told no, you can't do that. You have to do this instead, and it takes him a while to come around and accept that.
Yeah, a lot of the times whenever you see these younger characters, because he's 16 at the beginning of the book, where they're like, you have a grander purpose, you need to do this, and then next scene, okay, I'm all in. And that is just not how it would go. Like,
right.
Especially after losing your wife, and you've been taken away from your family, and especially now you've been told the entire world that you have thought was real is now a complete lie.
Yeah.
And now you have to accept this. Oh, by the way, now we're going to genetically modify you to become one of the top societies. And now you have to, learn all this other, how their mannerisms, how they talk, how they act. And now you have to treat everyone like they're lower than you because you're a gold at this point.
Yeah.
Except there is the little extra wrinkle in there of the only way we can insert you is we can't replace a family that's important to society. So we have to find a really, really low down goal.
And then kill them.
And put you in that place, which means you're still going to be treated like dirt by these people.
Yep.
Yeah.
Which it's just that play and that extra little bit of nuance is just so good throughout because of how it works on him over time.
Yeah. Well, and as he gets further on, especially towards the end of the book, where all of his plans are kind of coming together, but then obviously the Proctors are throwing tons of wrenches in there to stop him from defeating the Jackal. And you can see, especially once he gets not betrayed, he gets defeated by Cassius, and then Mustang nurses him back to health, and then he nurses her back to health during the winter. You can really see a lot of him kind of like battling with himself of like, I still, EO was my wife, and but you can tell that like even if he doesn't want to admit it, even in his mind, he's definitely developing feelings for Mustang as he's kind of going up.
Which isn't her actual name. Her actual name is Virginia.
Yeah, but
that is how he refers to her most of the time.
Right.
Yeah,
And actually,
Mustang.
I really liked the nicknames in the school, right? Because like everybody that did anything of note, good or bad, got a moniker for it, right?
Mhm.
And that actually helped a lot with group characterization to rapidly characterize groups of characters to kind of cut down on the work the author had to do on individuals. For specifically talking about the that's not the note I wanted.
Reverse.
Oh yeah, talking about the Howlers and the Dead Horses.
Yes.
Like two distinct units of fighters that just with that name you were able to associate, oh, they took part in this event in the book.
They did that.
And they are led by this character and they stay with that character because they are in one way or another like that character. And so that kind of takes one brush and paints the whole squad with that brush, and you immediately have a picture in your mind of what they're like.
The main theme of this whole battle stuff that we'll get into is tribalism. So they are kind of being placed into their own tribes by self-selection.
Whenever I thought of the Howlers and Severo in particular, I just thought of Princess Mononoke, of her just running around in a wolf pelt.
Oh, yes. Okay,
just the entire film.
Yeah.
Or for the whole book of him just running around with a spear.
But at least in theory, Mononoke's wolf pelt is well cured and cleaned, and theirs are not. They are dirty. These kids are dirty.
I mean, they're just like hanging out in mud and climbing up latrines and...
Oh, yeah. And I will say, you mentioned him, the Jackal. For a lot of characters kind of being a one-off archetype, while it is a one-off archetype, it's the manipulator, the person who's willing to sacrifice anything to accomplish their objectives. He still comes off, at least through Darrow's eyes, as a really chilling character.
Well, it's kind of a bait and switch, right? Because you expect him to be the climactic villain, and he's not. He is there to be set up for future encounters in later books, because the climactic villains actually turn out to be the proctors instead of any of the students, even though he does have enemies among the students.
Right.
And so that kind of bait and switch was actually really refreshing.
I
really
liked that. Yeah. Because whenever he basically caught the Jackal in a reverse trap, and I was like, wow, I don't know where they're going to go with this if he's already got him here. And then, obviously, like, he kills Pax, and then he runs away, and then whenever they, he cuts off his own arm or hand to escape. Essentially, it's just like it definitely is a really good paramount to that kind of character, and clearly he's still alive, so he's going to show up in other books, I'm assuming.
Well, I mean, he is the favored son of the governor who Darrow swears himself to at the end of the book.
Yeah. Well, he's not really favored anymore after he lost the...
Well, he's his only son left at that point.
But I mean, I guess the way that I interpreted the governor talking with Darrow at the end, he was like, hey, that guy, I don't like him anymore. You clearly defeated him. You're stronger than him. You should just be under my name. So I can use you as a surrogate son.
There's an element of that, but he's not a man that discards resources either. So
no, of course not. But he'll probably just again, I haven't, Steven's already.
As the only person in this conversation who has read past the first book, I'm very much so enjoying this discussion.
we're purely speculating as we have not read beyond the end of the first book.
Second book is still also quite good. I'll just throw that out there.
Yeah.
What I've only like halfway through, but
no.
So I guess we're probably ready to move on into the other category, which would be plot.
Yep.
Where is that in my notes? Oh my goodness.
You get to start for that one.
I know, that's why I'm trying to find it in my notes. Did I just not name anything plot?
This is the first time he actually wrote more notes.
Oh no, it's right here. I just can't see it because there's too many words. Okay, so plot.
It's like, oh, look at my notes. They are so like a garden that is overgrown with weeds and vines.
Yes. Anyways, so plot. So I gave it an 8. So intrigue on intrigue on intrigue. Everyone has something they want. And while they can be somewhat similar goals, they're also working towards them in different ways. They're also using other resources outside of the game. The game, there's a game within a game, right?
Yeah. Well, and that's always a good way to get an overarching conflict, but then you have these really smaller little tidbits of politics and movements of stuff.
Yeah, and I gotta give him credit. The main character fails a lot.
Yeah,
he tries, he falls short, he adapts, he improvises, and he overcomes. Right. this is one of my favorite types of, especially if we're going to be trapped first person present tense. Like we are literally smashed into this man's skin right up against it. Like the little bulges coming out of his cheeks. Like you were right there. You don't get a choice. This is your ride.
I just imagine the cameraman for the film is just going to be like right up on him.
Oh no, not from the outside, from the inside. We're being pressed out of him from the inside. So if that's the only vehicle we get to ride in, and it is, him being the type of character who solves problems by being clever and coming up with new ways to approach, unexpected ways for the other students to deal with, for the proctors to deal with, and perpetually trying to find ways to change, which he so calls change the paradigm, but think outside the box, be different, use the fact that his upbringing is different, his experiences are different, and leverage that into new and unexpected ways to move forward, which from our perspective, if you have any knowledge of tactics or whatever else, maybe some of what he does isn't surprising, but for the Golds it sure is, because they would never think someone would stoop this low or let themselves be insulted to this extent or whatever else, whatever would go against personal honor. He kind of abuses that, and I love it.
Well, especially whenever he takes the flogging for not Titus.
It was
another T name.
Yeah. Oh, Tactus.
Tactus. Yeah. Whenever he takes the flogging for Tactus, and everyone is just so taken aback by this sacrifice. Where that's the only way to win him over, essentially.
Yeah. And even I don't know if it's Mustang or Sever, but one of them points out to them, you realize you've given them a tool
to where if they just don't like you,
if they decide they don't like you, they can abuse you. You have to be liked. And I really like the kind of, you have the character hits a low point. I mean, the character hits a bunch of low points throughout, honestly, but he hits, a lowest point and then recovers and learns. And it just, to me as a plot, which, my last note here really is that first person presence tense means that plot holes can be really hard to find because he just didn't know that this guy was going to be here. And we can't be like, wait a minute, you were having dinner over there.
Yeah.
It just, the opportunity to punch holes in there just isn't there as much. I think Joel has risen to the occasion though, and would like to put some holes in it. So I'm gonna throw this over to Joel.
I do. I've got a couple of holes. For the plot, I gave it a 7.
Okay.
Still fairly high.
Yeah.
And I think mostly it has to do with the first point being Darrow is a genius when the plot needs him to be, and he fails when the plot wants him to fail. And sometimes the transition from failure to genius feels earned, and sometimes it doesn't, right? Like sometimes he just thought 6 steps ahead and his opponent only thought 5 steps ahead. And you don't get to see any of that because it's all first person. So we're just like, okay, we're along for the ride. Sure. You thought of that.
And sometimes though, and it's something that bothers me, I know it probably bothers Joel in writing, is sometimes you have to get lucky, right? And this is kind of a sports trope where if you want to go undefeated in a season, sometimes the ball just has to bounce the right way. And that does happen to him, but it doesn't happen to him egregiously.
No, it doesn't.
The only part that really kind of knocked it for me was whenever he had the grav boots on when Apollo like brought him up in the air, where it's one of those things where it's like, we know that he knocked out the other proctor.
Well, through that whole sequence, I was waiting. Okay, I know you have this technology. When are you going to use it? When are you going to use it?
Yeah, and I guess I didn't think about him just having it. So whenever he was like, oh, he has the grab boots, I was like, oh, that's so cool. And then I thought about it. I was like, man, he really thought far, far ahead. Because this is like not like, like the next thing.
Well, I mean, he knew that the proctors were his enemies at that point.
And he knew Apollo was still there.
Yeah. So like that part I don't have a problem with as much as he obviously doesn't know how to use the signature weapon of the Golds, the sling blade. Like
that's not the signature weapon of the
Golds. No, not
the
the sling blade, the razor.
The razor.
He doesn't know how to use that. It's commented on that he doesn't know how to use that. That's an important part of the climactic battle, is that he's outmatched because he doesn't know how to use the one weapon that can get through their defenses. But he does know how to use grav boots, but nowhere in the story is that ever explained why he knows how to use grav boots.
They're just really simple to use.
They're boots that let you float.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay,
it doesn't
watch the first Iron Man though.
Oh, no. I'm being sarcastic.
This is super far in the future.
Sure.
They have their own inertial dampeners. Just get over it.
That was just more of a pet peeve, not like a huge plot hole, just kind of a, well, I mean, you said he can't use this, but he can use it. whatever. But he has to be able to use the grav boots because they have to use them in order to get up to the
one of them requires artistry. The other is just becoming a human rocket.
But really, the biggest single plot hole that I can think of is basically why Darrow, right? Like he's a prodigy, right? And
he's the youngest hell diver,
and presumably his uncle, according to Dancer, did not tell Dancer about him being a prodigy because he knew that Dancer would want him.
Yeah. I mean, that's fair if you don't want.
So that's okay. But like, what about him is the quality that they need? And the only thing that we have to look at is the one test that Dancer puts him through,
which is like the intelligence test.
And it's a specific kind of intelligence, and it's being able to see a trap and change the paradigm. And it is an extremely simple test that he claims, we have no reason to disbelieve him, that if Darrow fails this test, then they're not going to use him. And like, it just seems so incredibly flimsy for it to be this one card trick where both of them are fail states, but you're told that one of them is a success state. And so you have to figure out how to succeed when all of your options are
to fail.
Well, and it's like, sure, maybe he'd get it. Maybe he doesn't get it because his wife just died and you just pulled him out of the ground,
shambles,
and he's in shock,
dead,
right? Like, and then you just throw him away, but he was still a prodigy. So like the process of choosing Darrow from the Resistance's point of view felt really flimsy.
So
Darrow's motivations were great. Like everything on Darrow's side of that was good. But
so I want to jump into that because I don't know how well it was covered or not, or if it was brought up or not, because it was like a little blurb at the start of a chapter. And I don't know how the Audible book handled that. It does mention that when Darrow was bitten as a younger child by the pit vipers, he goes into this like it was bitten in the stomach.
Yeah.
And his uncle, quote unquote, sucked the blood out or the poison out.
Yeah, and they just said, well, that's not how this works.
Well, in the blurb, it actually proposes that he didn't
left
get
some of
all of it out, and that fighting that poison perpetually makes your heart stronger.
Yeah,
which is what allows him to survive the modifications.
The Cutter talks about that,
right? Yeah. So that could be because the uncle knows, right? He knows presumably this is a result of what has happened.
Yeah,
and he is an informant.
Well, because I mean, like, I guess the other question is, does the uncle know how society is up top?
Well, he's an informant, so he has to have some idea. I mean, he's informing them for some reason, right?
Yeah.
So you don't know how much he knows. And obviously you don't get to find out because he's a perpetual drunk and you only get smashed into Darrow's face and you don't get to see anything else. But
like all of that gets a little bit worse with the inclusion of Titus, right? Because you have another Red, presumably on exactly the same mission. And
what's the shotgun approach?
And part of it is you don't know really anything about the Resistance. So there might be other cells that are doing the same thing.
This could not be
completely uncoordinated. Right. And so like, that's a possibility.
It's a good way to get everyone killed.
And so
it's a great way. Yes.
So like, but the thing is, this is still, we're looking at this from the perspective of only the first book of the series. And we don't really know. There's a lot of stuff that could be going on. For instance, the first thing that I thought of when he discovered Titus's, origins is this common practice for the Golds? Like, are the Golds behind the Resistance because they want new blood in the Golds and they don't want their own caste to stagnate?
I mean,
well, like you definitely have the conflict within the Golds, right? And you see it with the way the Jackal is treated between the nepotism and people who still believe meritocracy should be a thing.
Yeah.
Fitchner is kind of an example of that, right? Where he's done everything. He's a proctor. He has not risen as far as he feels he should have, but he's done everything right as far as quote unquote he's concerned.
Yeah, but it's still a rigged game.
Right. And there are a lot of wheels within wheels going on, even within just the first book. When we have Darrow makes the slip up in the confrontation with Apollo, and Severo makes a reference to, oh, well, the audio is garbled, so I just deleted it.
Yeah.
And it's like, is this guy helping him? Is he only helping him because
he's loyal to him
of friendships?
From the game.
Right. Which we get kind of beaten into as, hey, these loyalties are temporary. Yeah. They are of opportunity, et cetera, et cetera. So there's enough of wheels moving on in there for me to kind of give some of these a pass because it has to unfold. If it doesn't land later, then
and that, and I mean, it is difficult to just analyze a single installment out of a series because the author intends it to be a full arc,
Yeah,
right?
Well, it
Presumably
still needs
knew
to
at the
make
time.
sense
Yeah.
within the confines of a singular book, though,
Yeah.
or
Well, I
installment.
mean, it's perfectly acceptable to put in things that don't make sense because they're not supposed to make sense until you
Yeah.
get information from a later book. So
Yeah.
like, if you look at it as a single book, you're like, that's a plot hole. It doesn't make sense, but it's actually just an unresolved mystery.
Mhm.
So like, that's a possibility.
Yeah.
So, Andrew, we've been having our shots here.
Oh, yeah, no, you're fine. So I gave it a 9. It seems like we're pretty much like right in line here. We kind of talked about a lot of the stuff that I was going to bring up, but
Rip. I still have points.
no, I mean I have 5 points too. Really, I mean the whole plot like was pretty surprising because I was not expecting just Lord of the Flies for 3/4 of the book.
Yeah.
I was getting through and I was like, okay, cool. They're gonna go do like a little game thing or whatever, and then by the end of the book he'll get accepted into something, which is what happened. But I didn't realize that like whenever they were explaining the game, that the game was actually like a year of their life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was your time at the Institute.
Yeah.
And that was it. Yeah.
And one of the things that I just love throughout whenever they're inside of the game or whether or in the valley is every once in a while, whenever like tensions got super high, there's always that one person. They're like, "It's a game. We're still in school," and then like you're like, "Oh yeah, you're right. They are."
Oh yeah. This is supposed to be. This is getting up for class.
Yes, but dead people.
The only way we got into the school was by killing someone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I do like whenever he's talking to Fitchner, maybe like the first or second time, where he's like, people are dead, and he's like, it's within limits,
Right. Like he's like, okay, and he figures it out, right?
Yeah.
Because he figures out because they haven't been stopping the killings.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And even though they're like, you don't kill each other. But if it happens, it happens.
It happens. Yeah.
Like accidents happen. But like they're not even taking that much of an effort to stop it.
Mhm.
And so he's like, okay, I know that you actually intend this.
Mhm.
How many of us can die?
And he's like,
And-
it's within limit.
Yeah. It's like
13%.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, and that was, I think, the same conversation that he had whenever he was like, oh yeah, well the Jackal is probably like he's the furthest ahead right now
Mhm.
in stuff. And then you find out later that he's actually really terrible at what he's doing because he locked his entire house into a cavern and then cannibalized on them because they were stuck there for 2 months or
until
whatever.
literally Daddy was like, "Oh my God, my son's an idiot. Look, if I give you some money, can you just go dig him out and give him some weapons, please?"
It honestly felt a lot like Joffrey from Game of Thrones, with like where you have Cersei and Jaime that have this like demon offspring that is just such a like he's just terrible at everything he does.
He's just kind of a horrible person. in
Yeah,
general.
and he's just a bad person. And then he's just like, well, you're the only one I got, so I got to try and lift you up.
The author does give the Jackal a sort of a menace all his own. That it's different. He's not a
fighter.
He's not a leader. He is not a fighter. But he is a strategist, and he is willing to do anything.
Right.
Yeah, literally
win.
anything to win.
Yeah.
Because the sealing them in was the last ditch answer strategy of this is a really bad situation, but the other alternative is we actually lose.
Yeah. But I do like how Fitchner said he was like, yeah, he would have been captured within the first like 2 weeks of the game.
Yeah.
Because he's just terrible at whatever he was doing. But yeah, I mean, like the whole game part was like I was interested with the setting and everything going into that, and then once that happened, I was like, ooh, this is like really my jam.
Yeah.
Because you got to see so much more from the characters than I was expecting to maybe get. Especially with the supporting characters, once the supporting characters were established as characters that were going to be of importance for him.
Yeah, because there's so many, because like each individual group starts with 50 students, and you just like so many are falling left and right as you go.
Bring on the culling.
And all of them have names, right? Because like, I mean, they're
well, and they're hypothetically they're all essentially equal in the hierarchy, assuming that no one's cheating.
Right. Well, and you also have the people who aren't being supported by parents who are cheating for them.
Yeah.
AKA the Jackal. But you have other people who are like, well, I'm the son of such and such, such, such. You can't do this to me. And Darrow doesn't really have that weight of expectations of, oh, I should be propped up and helped by Daddy because that's not what life was.
Yeah. I don't really have anything else to say for plot.
Okay, well, I'm gonna throw in one other
knock yourself
thing about EO specifically, because there was some concern, right? We're gonna kill the main character's wife early to develop the character and move the plot forward, and it kind of feels a little fridgy, which is concerning. But I'll give them. Do I want to give him props for killing someone in a reasonable? Yeah, okay, I guess I am. This is what this book does to me. It was well played in the sense that it was her mistake that put them in the situation they end up in. And then it is actually a survivable thing, and she chooses. Like she deliberately does what she does to commit suicide.
Yeah.
You could make the argument, because Darrow has the issue with the Sons of Ares, where, well, why didn't you save her? And this is maybe plays back into the idea, well, what makes him different or valuable? But throughout, like playing that trauma out throughout was really well done, just across the book, because they made it meaningful.
And especially because even as he's falling in love with Virginia,
Mustang,
he is.
Her name is Mustang until said otherwise.
Okay. Even as he's falling in love with her, he always struggling with wanting to be loyal to his dead wife. And
he takes big risks too, because this is part of his identity, his personal identity. And you're putting a spy in deep cover, like the deepest cover. He doesn't even have his original body at this point.
Yeah.
And he's still permitted to bring along his pendant with the flower inside of it from his wife, his wedding band,
and he gets to keep his name.
And he fights to keep his name, which I think those things were really important in terms of how well is he going to hold on to himself, because those are his touchstones. And while he doesn't have them for a lot of the game until I think Fitchner brings it to him, or Severo, someone gets it as like a bounty and gives it to him because they realize it's his.
I think it's Severo.
I think it's Severo too, which fits. But I thought that was really interesting, just because it is ultimately, well, this is a terrorist organization trying to put a deep cover spy in, and they're leaving flags that could get him caught. But it's so important that it has to go in, because at some point, he doesn't just need to hold on to his identity. The terrorist cell needs him to remember that he's a Red, because we can't put you through all this, pamper you, and then you learn how to be quote unquote better than us, and then you just join society. And thanks guys, bye.
Talking about that, like I thought that it was really, really well done on the author's part to actually have commentary on political philosophy going on through the game, and the way that the feudal systems between the houses develop and all of that stuff. Like, in this genre, it's easy to come up with, well, we're going to design this game and our characters have to go through this game. But unlike a lot of the others, this game had something interesting to say while it was being played. And so part of the thing that it had to say was, it is teaching through firsthand knowledge these kids, these individuals, what civilization means and what empire means.
And why it's so difficult to hold on to it, and so important to create it and maintain it.
And how inevitable it is, because if you don't do it, someone else will.
Yes.
And it is so easy to see someone getting brainwashed by that process.
Coming from a supposed position of good and moving through this process and ending up not being a good person at the end, but they had good intentions. No, I was shocked by the depth, honestly, in this. So now we're going to move forward and talk about the writing. And do I give it to Joel to start?
I mean, I actually technically haven't started anything.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, full apology. We'll let, you know what? I think Andrew and I's themes are going to be a little different from Joel, so he's pretty protected anyway, so he can go last. Andrew, take us away.
I mean, I actually gave writing an 8. It was kind of really the only two major knocks were just it took pretty much a quarter of the book for me to get through the present tense, because there was a couple portions at the beginning of the book where he's like on the drill and doing stuff where it's happening so quickly, and it's like the first or second chapter of the book, I'm just like, I have no idea what is happening right now.
It's pretty brutal. He world builds through like slang and whatnot real fast.
One of the things that I really liked about it, though, towards the end of the book, was almost the exact same thing, where the action is happening and then you have no idea what's about to happen, because he has no idea what's about to happen. So when something does happen, it's actually really exciting. And basically, if he doesn't think it verbally, quotation marks, that then you don't know what he's going to do either. So, there's like one layer of like, you don't know what external people are going to do. Then you also don't know what internal things are going to do if he hasn't like vocalized it, essentially.
Right.
And especially like the scene whenever he captures the jackal with the knife, I was in my car, like, waiting to go into Home Depot. And I was like, well, I have to wait for the whole chapter to finish. Because I was actually afraid that he was going to tell this dude that,
he's going to slip up.
Yeah, he was going to slip up because, as far as he's just drunk. And I was like, oh, no. This is like too early in the book for this to happen. And then, he does the bait and switch where he captures the jackal. And then you're like, oh, this is cool.
Yeah. So I will say I did actually catch the earlier mention about the wine, which was just grapes, because he actually mentions, they even looted 50 gallons of grape juice because it hadn't had time to ferment yet, which why was Bacchus even hold on to this? And then he immediately uses it.
Yeah.
Which was nice. But no, that scene is really tense.
Yeah. I don't really have anything else to add on. So you guys can add and then I'll interject.
Yeah. Well, I guess I'll jump in.
I object.
Keep Joel at the back of the bus.
Get back, Joel.
Back to the future. Anyways, so I gave the writing a 9.
Okay.
Mostly because the first person present tense is kind of an insane risk. It's more acceptable within the YA and dystopia genres.
I mean, first person is everywhere in YA.
Yeah, absolutely. Present tense is a huge risk, especially billing it as sci-fi and not YA. It's even bigger risk. And I think the downsides of it really show early on because when you have to have a care, especially from us, we're all in our 30s and we're reading this dude's 16. And the first 2 chapters, man, this guy is full of himself. He is on top of life. And, the author he needs this character to describe himself to you, or you're not going to know who he is or what's going on.
Yeah.
And through this huge lens of arrogance, et cetera. And that's pretty rough read. And I actually think it pays off really well because throughout the book going forward, he's kind of, at the start of the book, he's at his highest emotional point in a lot of ways. And he is really beaten and downtrodden off of that to build himself up into potentially a better person, which is, you got to have an arc, got to have a dip in there somewhere, right?
Yeah. The dip just happens real fast.
Real fast and real hard. And I thought it was really interesting how at the beginning, especially, his sentences are very short. He's very terse. His vocabulary isn't huge. He has a specific slang of curse words, etc. And then as the book goes on, the writer expands his vocab because he's learning. His sentences become longer, especially when he's thinking internally about himself. He has more developed thoughts, in a sense, or a better way to articulate what he's thinking to us, thankfully. But then when you hit these big shifts of pressure, and Joel, you touched on this a little bit, he reverts to form, right? The sentences get short and choppy. It gets hard to know what's going on, which helps convey the harshness of the action. He's uncertain, he's scared, he's concerned, he's taking big risks. But it's an interesting way to show the character off in that when it comes down to it, who does he revert to? Is he Darrow the Gold or Darrow the Red? And in pressure, he's red. And that's still who he is. He hasn't been compacted into something different yet.
And he still has the primal urges of someone that would be from, a drilling rig.
Right. Yeah. A really rough lifestyle, honestly.
No, go ahead.
No, okay. But it's interesting just because of how much it can ramp up the intensity, especially when he's under a lot of duress, stress, pressure, and you're
pain.
Or pain, because he gets put in a lot of pain, and it's just like, buddy, don't slip up. Like all the times that he's around Cassius, and internally he knows he killed Cassius's brother to get into this stage of the game, and Cassius is going to kill the SOB that did this to his beautiful, wonderful brother, yada 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 yada, and it's just the sweating meme off to the side. You get the big vein on the forehead. You can't handle this. And his sentences crunch down. He's like, Darrow, don't mess up. Don't revert to form. And same thing with you and the Jackal.
Yeah.
And then, it does eventually happen with Apollo. But I thought that was a great play in writing and a really good use of how he started as a person and then how it affects him going through, expressed through the actual words on the page, right? Because that's not always an easy thing to do. And I mean, I could almost imagine, Pierce Brown is sitting there as he's writing out these intense scenes, and he's getting more intense, and it's getting harder and harder for him to write these sentences, and they're getting shorter and shorter. His words look like crap, and he's like, "What did I write here? Is this, that, whatever? Just put it in." I don't know, but it was really interesting just to see that transformation, because again, first person present tense, you don't get that very often, and it's for a reason, because it's really hard to do. So on that note, I'm gonna hand it over to Joel.
So I'm gonna pick up that standard, and I'm gonna carry on and continue saying good things after I give you the score, which is a 6.
Oh gosh.
So I thought that even though, the first person present tense really jarring, it took me probably 3/4 of the book to get to where I wasn't just seeing that pulsing in my face as I'm reading the book,
which is impressive, because you were listening to it. You weren't actually like,
it was still a visual experience.
for me, I physically looked at the page and went, "Oh no, this is first person. Oh, this is present tense. What's going on?"
Yeah.
It was weird.
But that's not something to ding the author on, because that is a legitimate narrative style choice, right? And I thought that the voice that he used, like you were talking about, was very well developed and very distinct, and really gave you insight into the character. And that's one of the strengths of the first person viewpoint,
right?
Is that it lends itself to being really intimately involved in the emotional state of a single character.
And as long as it's well written and it's a character that's interesting that you can relate to, kind of like what you said at the beginning of the cast, was if you can't relate to him in any form, it's going to be a really hard read.
Yeah, it's going to be really awkward.
But if you do hit that kind of that level with him as you're reading, it can be really exhilarating, honestly.
Yeah.
But then to kind of change tone a little bit, kind of going on to something that was a little maybe like almost there but not quite there, was the way that he would fairly consistently refer to things from the perspective of, oh, if you're from Earth, then this would be the language you would understand. Like, he talks about being 18 years old, Earth standard, right? Almost as an aside.
Well,
he talks about
that one, at least, is fair, because the big issue with sci-fi is, how do you
measure
how many hours you have,
Sure.
how many, so that one I'll accept.
But then there's the deerlings, which are genetically modified deer. So they look different, but he doesn't describe, and this is another point too, but he doesn't describe them. He just says, if you are from Earth, then you would think they sort of look like deer. So he constantly refers to things from an Earther's perspective, but the character has never been to Earth.
There's no reason to think that way.
The only reason that he knows anything about Earth is because of the crammed education that he got in order to become a gold.
No, actually, shoot. That actually might fall apart. So early on, because he's a minor, right? And they literally, this is an enslaved population.
Oh yeah, they watch the HC.
Yes, he does not, like, when the day's work is over, you don't go outside and hang out. They live underground. They're packed in. The only thing they get is the official propaganda of the society, right, through the HC. And a lot of that is based around showing them, like, Earth and what they could make Mars be. So he actually says this, like, when he steps out into the garden at the start with Io, it's the first time he's seen sky, but like, trees, leaves, he's seen all this on the hollow, but he never expected it to hit as hard as it did. And, I'm familiar with it, but I didn't expect to have the nostalgic yearning for something I've never known.
Yeah.
So he does have familiarity where he would say, well, I know these are all Earth broadcasts. Oh, if I was looking at this from Earth, I would have said that's a deer, but I know it's not. Yeah. Because I've seen them. So I'll give it a pass.
Yeah, I'm willing to see it from that perspective, but
it's still cheap and easy.
It's still a missed opportunity.
Yes.
Because you could have used those situations to reinforce to me, the reader, the fact that this is someone who is not from Earth.
Right. Or you could have at least beaten in that he's never seen it in person before. Oh, I only saw this on National Geographic 2020 or whatever. And I never expected it to be this fast, this small, this brown. Yeah. Something, give me something that's new.
So I mean, kind of piggybacking on that, there is almost no description in the entire piece.
Yes.
Nope.
Yes.
Right. And there is, because talking about the deerlings, like, there is no telling you, the reader, what this thing looks like with words. It is just a picture of deer. It's basically that. And
he does a very good job at describing the violence, though,
and
emotions.
and emotion.
But like, the character is constantly making conclusions and just telling the reader the conclusions. And instead of the author describing the input that the character is getting so that you can make the conclusions along with the character. And so essentially through the entire book, the author is telling you and not showing you, which is it's a bit of a problem.
It's a thing.
Well, and the flip side to that is ultimately he didn't sit down to be Robert Jordan, right? He didn't sit down to write a bajillion words about a city that you'll see once or whatever.
Sure.
He sat down to write really, really tight emotional decisions of hierarchy, leadership, civilization, these kinds of things.
Violence.
Right? That's and violence. And the violence inherent in the system.
And the book definitely still works, right? Like none of this completely undermines the book in any way. And like on top of that, if you add more description and you start trying to pull the reader along instead of just handing them conclusions, you start to up that word count.
Right.
The word count of this book is already sitting at just under 125,000 words, which is way up the upper end of what your typical adult novel for the sci-fi fantasy genre is desired to be at by publishing houses.
Right.
So if you start putting in a lot of extra stuff in order to satisfy my desires for how the writing is to be done, then you start having to cut plot elements,
other pieces, and then at that point, like
I think there were 2 extraneous castle assaults that didn't have to be in the story.
I could probably agree with that. Like because there was the one whenever they were taking over Ceres, which I think was really important to the story because that basically freed up Mustang to be a
rogue agent.
rogue agent essentially. But the second one, well, no, I think that even the one later on when they he basically they're both, him and Mustang are both healthy, and then they are gathering forces to go and take another castle.
Apollo's castle.
Yeah, and how they're going to take it. Like, I think that was also pretty important too, just because it was the, I'm going to hold the guy over here that has the power to stop this from happening, and I'm going to keep him distracted while my dudes are crawling through bathrooms.
Yeah, like I really like the sequence of, we have part 1, he's a red. Part 2, he's in physical transition. Part 3, he is rising and ultimately falling as head of his house in the school. And part 4 is where he's the rogue agent and he's realized that he has to play against the proctors, not against the other students.
Right. Yeah.
And so I really love that structure. I just feel like you could have shrunk a little bit out of each one of them, and then you gain the room to really texture your world with extra description.
Yeah, and that's I don't disagree.
Yeah. And I'm not prepared to tell you you're wrong. just say that now.
I am. You're just not prepared to tell me.
No, but what he's saying is that 2 out of 3 of us enjoyed it.
No.
3 out of 3 of us enjoyed it.
Enjoyment is not relevant to this discussion. No. I'm not telling you you're wrong, because listening to Andrew's first bit about this, right, the first couple of chapters where Darrow is just talking about himself and where he is, and it was just, what is going on? Oh, you're in a mine. Oh, we're on Mars. Oh God, please just talk to somebody else for a minute. Like that's that point, especially at the start, there needed to be like new environment, new description of the environment, move forward in the environment.
Well, especially whenever he got done with his work day, and then he went and they did the whole Laurel thing, and then EO brought him aside and they went over to the garden,
right?
And I'm like, oh my gosh, he finally has someone to have a conversation with. So we can have any kind of information about what is happening.
And she's dead. Okay, back to the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I honestly, the first few chapters were nuts, because it was like, and she's dead. Okay, we saw that coming. And he's killing himself. And you're going to get out of this? Do I get a new main character? What's happening right now? And then it's like, okay, we got a little bait and switch.
Yeah.
That's a little... don't put Chewie in the other transport. Don't do this.
There it is.
I mean, they did commit to EO's going to die, and she's going to die for her cause.
Now, there was a literary trick that the author used that I loved,
Uh-huh.
which was at the very beginning when he's describing his father's death, and he uses the phrase, "They let the loved ones do it."
Yes.
And then when his wife dies, and he's like, she was too light, and the rope, because of the low gravity on Mars, the rope wasn't killing her quickly.
And then they
but
let the
they
loved
let the
one.
loved ones do it, and you know it's him.
And it's just
and you're
so
just like,
oh my
heartbreaking.
gosh. Yeah, no, that because it's like it is the no good option. Do
Yeah.
you let the loved ones suffer? Do you put them out of their suffering? Or
Mhm.
literally the goals are forcing them to kill themselves, which
Yeah.
is played out throughout, right? They always favor the gammas, and it's the competition of, well, who can beat the gammas, and no one can because it's rigged.
Yeah.
And you see that travel up the cast.
Mhm.
So I don't know. It's really interesting just because you have so many parallels throughout each level that you get to see.
Mhm.
And within the reds, it's not as compressed. It's a little more spread out in how it's operating. Within the golds, it's hyper compressed because it's such a competitive society that is theoretically a meritocracy, and in execution may not be.
Yeah.
Which, go deeper into the books. We'll find out more, maybe. I don't know.
Well, and it's again, me and Joel haven't read the second book yet, but it definitely feels like a lot of the kind of curtain was lifted up to many of the people that survived the game,
Mhm.
and especially like Mustang, because she that's the governor is her dad, and
Arch governor,
whatever,
because the terms are a little weird.
but he clearly does not favor her at all, and
Right.
he even says it in the whenever he's talking with Darrow at the end there. But it's one of those things where I don't, going into the second book, I'll be interested to see if any of these other characters, one, carry over, and then two, if they kind of start having these disenfranchised feelings about it's like, oh well, clearly this was not the game that we were here to play.
Right. Yeah. No, the fact that so much of the book is devoted to the game, which is just a small drama within the greater game, not just for the other golds, but for Darrow, right? Like his purpose is so much bigger.
Yeah, so much grander
than this, or at least they hope it is, right?
Yeah.
He expects it to be, to make Eo's dream true.
Yeah.
Because I really also, we're kind of into just talking about it in general now, but I got to give him props too for kind of the shift, because when he is, recruited, when he's dug up and pushed into the Sons of Ares, he's focused on vengeance, right?
Mhm.
And Dancer kind of pulls that down a little bit, tone it down.
He's like, I want to kill the arch governor. He's like, whoa, that is so small potatoes
right.
here.
You're not changing it. You're just causing a death. That doesn't change anything.
Yeah.
And then you do get that a kind of a nice decompression for the character over the course of him being genetically altered, because it's such a long process
Mhm.
for him to really internalize and make decisions, et cetera. And then you put him in the game and it's right back to the raw emotion, vengeance, retribution, all these primal, deep instincts within humankind.
Yeah.
And he indulges in a fair number of them, and sometimes that goes wrong. But then you hit the very end of the book and he is right there. He is standing next to the arch governor and could literally probably just snap the dude's neck and accomplish what he wanted to do at the beginning of the book.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And at that point, he's either broadened his horizons and said, this won't be how I accomplish Eo's dream.
Yeah.
Or he's letting himself be subsumed into Gold Society and is just becoming another cog.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And you don't know. So I really like that we have a conclusion, but it's because we have more books. It's not necessarily exclusive.
Mhm.
So I think we've covered everything.
Yeah. Moving on to originality.
Originality.
Yes.
Doesn't come into the actual aggregate score.
No
This
factor
is
in our
just
rating,
our own personal feelings.
Yeah.
which we've had plenty of.
Which
so
all
far.
of them have been our own personal
Yeah.
feelings, but these are more of them.
These are more personal feelings. I gave Originality a 7. It's still a YA dystopian. Going into it, even knowing nothing about the book, I still had a general idea of what it was going to be, and it kind of was. But then it turned into, Lord of the Flies, Game of Thrones, feudal war for 3/4 of the book, and I was all there for it. I loved it. Honestly, I'm really excited to start listening to the second book probably this coming week. And the fun part is I have about 2 hours left of the second Wheel of Time book. And then we started this one, and I'm just gonna keep going with this one.
All sad. Well, I gave it an 8.
Yeah.
Because the same reasons, right? YA Dystopia, Brent, what have you done to us? Why? And then it's like, oh, these are all of these tropes taken to an extreme, a very high
better.
level. Yeah. A lot of it is done just better. I mean, it's kind of cheating because, you know, the whole Newton quote, you know, if I've seen further, it's because I've stood on the shoulders of giants, right? But I mean, I don't know if that's the case here or if it's that he's kind of crushing what's beneath him because he's the giant, you know? But overall, no, I was very pleasantly surprised. My expectations weren't super high. The first couple of chapters were rough.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden stuff clicked and we were off to the races and I'm all in, finishing the book, throw down some notes, pick up book 2. I want to know what's going on.
And you're almost done with book 2.
I'm halfway. I only spent like a day or so reading into book 2 and then left it be because real life and I had a bunch of other
podcast related things.
Yeah, other stuff that had to be done. So, you know, so it goes. Joel?
Well, I gave it a 6 for originality just because like it's all of the elements, regardless of how well they were executed, which was overall very well, are pulled from an established line of this kind of story. You have everything from Hunger Games, which precedes this, published in 2014. I'm sorry, 2008. This was published in 14. All the way back to Ender's Game, published in 1985, where it's pulling elements from a rich history of YA and YA adjacent dystopian
sci-fi-esque.
Yeah, sci-fi-esque sort of things. And it recombined things in fun and interesting ways. And again, it was executed fairly well. But ultimately, middling for originality.
I mean, it's still a YA.
But that doesn't mean that it wasn't entertaining.
Absolutely.
Oh, no, it was incredibly enjoyable. And we just want to thank Brent Wong once again for the suggestion.
Seriously, that was a really fun read.
Yeah, and I feel like I did him a little bit of a disservice because I was like, oh man, like YA, what are you doing to me?
See, every time we see him now, whenever we go play X-Wing, he's just going to make fun of us.
I'm never going to hear the end.
Yeah, never going to hear the end of it.
But anyways, that sounds like all the time we have for this episode. So until next time, I'm Steven.
I'm Andrew.
And I'm Joel.
And every spoiler was intended. Thank you for tuning in. If you like what you heard, you can support the show for as low as $1 at patreon.com/spoilersintendedpodcast. We also have a Discord server and would love to have more people joining in the conversation. Links are in the description below. Thank you.